welcome to Moneylife. Let's talk about statutory auditors who've been having a rough time this week. And I think it's high time and they deserve whatever has happened to them. Series of events have happened this week which seems to have sort of burst into the public domain, the quality of statutory audits that have been happening in this country. But let's start from the beginning. In fact, on 11th June, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs moved the National Company Law Tribunal against Deloitte, Deloitte Haskins and Sells, which is the statutory auditor for the ILFS group, along with BSR Associates, which is part of the KPMG India network. These two are part of the Big Four, and the NCLT is the National Company Law Tribunal, which has been hearing all the cases related to the virtual collapse of infrastructure leasing and financial services, which had huge borrowings of nearly 1 lakh crore rupees and has not been able to repay it. As you know, the board was sacked and there's a new management in place headed by Uday Kotak, and there is a serious investigation by the Serious Frauds Investigation Office as well as the Enforcement Directorate. I must say that under this government, the SFIO has done a remarkable job about the speed with which it has acted, both in terms of its investigation and filing charge sheets. So a charge sheet was filed on 11 June to say that Deloitte and BSR Associates and their partners must be removed from the statutory audit. They have named specific partners, their names are there, and it's a 214 document that has been prepared in record time. This commendable speed of action is obviously sending shockwaves all over the system, because all kinds of things have been bursting into the public domain. I think we need to discuss this because, as I say all the time, statutory auditors are the first line watchdogs. We depend on them to ensure that financial statements of companies present a fair account of their operations and their finances. Now, if this statutory watchdog fails to bark, then everybody else who comes after, who's also been negligent, like the Reserve Bank of India, which didn't act on its own investigation reports for 3 years, or the rating agencies, which were happy to accept these, cooked up books, all of them come later in the queue. If you don't fix the statutory auditors, if you don't kill this absolutely venal nexus between business and audit firms, and especially the biggest firms in the world, then nothing is going to change. You're going to keep having scam after scam, financial scandals, the cost of which is borne by us, the people of India and the country. Whether it is mutual fund investments that you make or direct investment in debt instruments and NCDs, when large companies collapse because their books are cooked and it's found out too late, we pay the price. And I think it's wonderful that action has started in real earnest by the MCA and is moving at top speed. So let me look at a few things that have happened, not just the action against LCLT. Lots of things have just been bursting into the public domain, and we need to look at all of them to get a clear picture of how bad this is. So one company that has been making news for a long time is Reliance. But before we come into Reliance, let me tell you, I talked about Deloitte. We talked about BSR, which is action by the Serious Frauds Office or MCA under NCLT. Now, remember that when Ramalinga Raju in 2009 came up with a confession one fine morning and admitted that the books of Satyam, a high-flying IT company, were completely cooked, who were the auditors? Pricewaterhouse and Company. What has happened? For 9 years, they spent some time in jail, they were arrested, the partners were behind bars, but this action dragged on for 9 years. It's only in 2018, under the current SEBI chairman, that there has finally been a punishment, just a 2-year ban and a disgorgement of sorts, and even this is not applicable this year. So at the moment, nothing happens. They continue with their audit, but this is now the third of the Big Four or Big Five companies that is under a spotlight. In fact, PwC has been controversial for a long time. It has got away with things for a very, very long time. Now look at what happens. I'm talking about this week. PwC is also the auditor of Reliance Capital and Reliance Home Finance. These are part of the Anil Ambani group and have been making news for all the wrong reasons in the recent past. But there was a shocker 2 days ago, and I must fix the date, when suddenly we heard that PwC has resigned its audit with immediate effect and said that it will not sign the accounts. The company reacted with denials. They had two auditors. They said the second auditor will continue, and PwC Reliance has threatened legal action against PwC. PwC in turn has complained to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs with a sensational claim that it is being threatened and intimidated by Reliance. Many of you know that the share price of Reliance Capital and Reliance Homes crashed a couple of days ago when this happened, and everything is still in a state of limbo. Now, it's important to know that Pricewaterhouse stepped down at a curious time. Just a day before PwC put in its resignation, there was a report by REDD, which is a well-known forensic investigative firm based in Singapore, which talked about how it used the box system to be moving money in a bunch of shell companies without having to make disclosures. We also know that the mutual fund industry has a huge exposure to Reliance Capital and Reliance Home Finance, which is already controversial because the Anil Ambani group has not been able to pay a lot of people. We also know that he almost went to jail for not being able to pay Ericsson. So in this entire mess, PwC, which was quiet, suddenly wakes up when there is a red report and says that we are resigning the audit. They've all gone to lawyers and now they threaten intimidation. None of the regulators, curiously enough, have reacted to this. This is a development in just 2 days. Obviously, stock prices crash and it means that investors are hurt and affected. Now let's come to another company and another big auditor. This is Infibeam Avenues, and it announced on 11 July, all at the same time, the last few days, it announced that it had got permission finally from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs to terminate its auditor, SRBC and Company LLP, which is SR Bartley Boy, again a part of the large audit firms, very reputed audit firms, and this is in fact part of the Ernst & Young group. So again, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has given it permission. You want to know why its audit was terminated? It's because apparently this company had leaked price-sensitive information which was not in the public domain. Now, Moneylife, those of you who follow us regularly, have been constantly telling you about how major corporate developments are usually preceded by fairly brazen price movement, which indicates that there has been insider trading. And here, this audit firm, large reputed audit firm, is terminated apparently for leaking information. That gives you another dimension of this completely venal nexus between business and audit firms, and a lack of ethics all round. Again, even in this case, none of the regulators have reacted as yet, but you would say the MCA permission is a sort of, action on its own, but not good enough if you ask me. Now let's move to a sensational third thing. This is a company called Eros International Media Limited. One fine day on 6th June, this just erupted in the public domain because CRISIL, which is our number one rating agency, suddenly downgraded this company, which is listed in the international markets, 10 notches, absolutely like a crash. Just before CRISIL did this, or I must say when CRISIL did this, apparently a company called Hindenburg Research, which is a US-based forensic financial research firm, has a short position on the stock, but it's been investigating the numbers because it doesn't quite buy what has been put out in the public domain. The research firm sent a team to India and did a deep audit of what was going on with Eros International, which is in the whole films business. In fact, it has a 5% stake by Mukesh Ambani. And this company is audited internationally by Grant Thornton and in India by Chaturvedi and Shah. Now, what has been found out over here? It's quite interesting. I'm going to read out some of these things to you. It says that the statutory auditors have failed to raise red flags despite enough holes in the company's functioning. It also says Eros's bankers seem to be more interested in generating fees through debt and equity offerings than in performing credible underwriting, and that the complex international structure probably made it too challenging for regulators to enforce. I mean, all this is fine, but the real nexus, again, as this research points out, is the auditors. Because look at what Eros said, which triggered off the work by Hindenburg. They say Eros's advances surged 207% and receivables shot up 66% in 1 year, 2017 and 18. And for some reason, Eros wasn't able to collect any of that money at all. Now, the research showed that all this was probably going around in shell companies and there were no receivables. It was all cooked up, and this was unearthed very, very systematically by even looking at subsidiaries, their shady auditors, one of whom is found to have an operation in a tiny building, slum redevelopment building with just enough room for a table. Now, yet this company is listed overseas, and the stock was obviously trading well until it was short sold in a big way by this research firm. I need to read out a couple of things that this research talks about, which again talks about the business audit firm Nexus. It says, we think Eros's collapse is an egregious failure of its auditors, Grant Thornton, to apply even basic scrutiny to the company's financial condition. What a scathing indictment. And it is all the more stunning because remember, I've done a whole video on how Grant Thornton has done a marvelous job in Project Icarus, which actually did a forensic audit of IFIN. So some parts of a large audit firm are doing well, and most of the top big 4 or 5 audit firms are, auditing hundreds of companies. So some groups are doing well and some are not. But all of them work under the umbrella of these big names which have all the large accounts in India, and unless there is a direction which says you will not collude with management or there's going to be a price to pay, none of them are going to bother with the rules and the mischief will continue. So the Hindenburg report, in fact, finally proves that the long-standing rumors about Indian companies using small unknown auditors, I've already talked about. This, which I mentioned, was happening in Eros television. Now the question is, where do we go from here? Where are we headed? In fact, media reports are already saying that if all the big auditors are in trouble, what happens? Who audits firms? It's a little bit like all the noise that's made about independent directors, as though this country with 1 billion people can't find enough of decent, qualified, educated human beings to be independent directors in large companies. Similar kind of drumbeat about audit firms, which is a load of nonsense. And I hope this government is not going to pay attention to it, because every time there is a crisis, new people emerge. In fact, in 1992, I remember after the security scam, everything that was wrong happened at that time. So like I said, investigations dragged on, charge sheets weren't filed for years. But one thing that happened is they all went to court. The government foolishly did not separate the civil and the criminal. So hundreds and hundreds of cases meant big business for law firms. And I remember some lawyers telling me in 92 that their business quadrupled or more, and today they are marquee law firms 25 years later. Exactly the same will happen with audit firms. Remember, a lot of the Deloitte information, the tip-off about the Nexus, came from an insider. The Project Icarus of Grant Thornton is a good job. So it's not as though the entire firm, all the auditors, every CA who works there is bad or is part of the Nexus. They can branch out, they will set their own companies, they will get an opportunity to compete fairly, they will get business, and they will grow. I think we need to get away from this dubious dependence on big names and allow new, greater ethical companies to come up in the Indian audit sector. I think what is more important is what the government has done, because it's got new norms, there's a new agency, it's not all depending on the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. The government seems very serious about working fast and fixing the issues. So while they've talked about one or two, they've not talked about the others. I would say that action has begun in a big way. I hope the momentum is sustained and it's carried forward, because it is this nexus between business and auditors that leads to watchdogs that don't bark, and that leads to eventually a 10 lakh crore bad loan problem that is being paid by us through the exchequer. So let's end this nexus now. Thank you.